the first thing I think you need to understand is that these people that you're comparing yourself to, you don't really know very well. You know, and what that means is that you see their shiny outside, but you don't see the reality of their life. And so what you're you know, maybe you're in California, see someone speeding down the road in a convertible Porsche, and you think, oh man, what a lucky bastard. And the truth of the matter is that he's thinking about wrapping his expensive sports car around the next cement pillar that he comes close to. You know, you can't tell, and people have hard lives, and even people who are comparatively fortunate have hard lives. And so the ideal that you're observing that makes you jealous and resentful is in large part an illusion that's created by your own mind. And you know, I can give you just one example. Is like, I know a fair number of extremely wealthy people, and most of the people I happen to know are people who've made their money themselves. And I tell you, man, they have a burden of responsibility that would crush me, would crush the typical person. They're just working flat out, like 90 hours a week, and they have thousands of people depending on them. And you know, they have their money, and they have their status, and that's not nothing. But don't be thinking that there isn't a price to be paid for that. You know, they don't see their families, they're often divorced, they don't see their children grow up, and they don't have time off. Now, there are wealthy, what would you call, playboy types, I suppose, who live out the dreams of wealth of a foolish 14-year-old, but they're not that common, and you have to be careful of what you're jealous of, because you don't really know what it is. And then the other thing that's kind of useful is to understand that you're different from everyone else. And this is especially true as you get older. When you're 17 or 16 or something like that, comparing yourself to other people makes a certain amount of sense, because 16 and 17-year-olds, they're kind of the same, you know, which is why when you go off to university, you can make friends so quickly. It's like, I'm just about 60. It takes me like 15 years to make a friend now, you know, as opposed to the 2 months that it took when I was 17. You're quite different from other people, and you shouldn't be comparing yourself to them, because they're not like you. You know, they don't have your family, they don't have your temperament, they don't have your troubles, they don't have your abilities. The only person that the only person that has those is you. And this is why one of the rules, I think it's rule 4, is compare yourself to who you were yesterday and not to who someone else is today. And see, that's a game you can win, because you could be a little better today than you were yesterday. And that's a good thing. You're a little better. That's a good thing. And you know, no doubt there are some things that you could improve. You know, if you sit and meditate for any length of time about what you're not doing optimally, answers will spring to mind. You have to be humble and wise enough to understand that you might have to aim pretty damn low, especially in those places where you're not functioning well. And it might be so embarrassing that you can't bring yourself to fathom that that's actually who you are. But you know, Jung described the fool, the archetypal figure of the trickster and the fool, as the precursor to the savior, to the redeemer. And that's an unbelievable bit of wisdom, because what Jung meant was that to put yourself together, which is to follow the path of redemption, follow the redeemer. If the redeemer is a type of personality that you could in fact be inhabited by or manifest, then this first steps towards that is to allow yourself to be a fool, right? It's because you don't know what you're doing. You have to admit that. And there's going to be a loss of ego or destruction of ego, arrogant ego that necessarily accompanies that. But you need the loss of that arrogant ego because it's precisely what's interfering with your movement forward. You know, it's part of the adversarial process, mythologically speaking, that stops moral progress. You're too proud of who you think you are to notice what you're like so that you could change properly. You don't want to sacrifice that part of yourself. It's probably associated with some delusion that helps you maintain, what would you say, a positive, although very fragile self-image, you know, in the absence of genuine effort. You'll discover a little bit more about your potential as you discover who you are, especially the darker parts of yourself, because then you discover your potential for mayhem. There's some real utility in that. You know, the discovery that you're dangerous. It's such a useful discovery. It's actually something that strengthens you, because the first thing that a realization like that can in fact produce is the ambition to incorporate that danger into a higher order personality, that dangerousness into a higher order personality. And that can make you implacable. That can make you someone who can say no when you need to say no. You know, that can make you someone who won't avoid necessary conflict. And so that's unbelievably useful. Moving through life and you have a plan or a dream and it shatters. You know, someone dies or a relationship breaks apart, or you have a terrible upset in your career, or you become ill in some unexpected way, then everything around you falls apart and you plunge into a chaotic underworld.
The belly of the whale.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yes, exactly that. And then maybe you stay there, because it isn't necessarily the case that people get out. You know, people die, people are in despair permanently, but frequently something tragic and terrible befalls you, and you fall apart, and you learn something profound as a consequence, and you put yourself back together, and when you come back out, you're more than you were when you went in. And that's happening at a small scale. Every time you learn something, you know, if you ever really learn something, it's usually painful. It usually means that you have to recognize that you're wrong in some important way. You have to let that part of you that's wrong die, and then you have to let a new part of you. Okay, so the self, imagine that you undergo a series of transformations in your life. There are collapses into the chaotic underworld, and then many resurrections. That happens continually, and that's what molds your character.